Hi everybody and welcome to Crafty Studio. My name is AnnMarie and today we're going to be working on another patchwork parcel. So this month's patchwork parcel in our lovely new boxes is designed by the lovely Sarah Jolly of Incomplete Stitches. And below in the description you will find a link not only to the PDF patterns, so rather than having them all printed for you A4 and every other way, just the A0 is in the box. We have all the other, if you have a projector, if you want to print it on A4, and also the instructions. Because we'd like to save a little bit of paper with these parcels, hence we've gone with a more eco-friendly cardboard compostable box, or you can use it for your sewing goodies. So down below in the description are the PDFs and you can download those. If you have any issues with downloading those, just drop me an email and then I can send them to you. There's no problem. So you could just look at these on your phone, or if you have a tablet or a device or something, you don't have to print them, but I'll show you the printed ones as we make the parcel. So this month we're going to be making a patchwork quilted tote bag. How cute is it? Oh, it's so cute. I'll show you some more photographs. This is just the diagram that Sarah has made. So let's open up our patchwork parcel box. You probably have done this already. So if you haven't gotten the patchwork parcel before, you'll know you get all the goodies and everything you need to make your pattern. So you get your pattern, you get me showing you how to do it and all the things, and then a couple of little extra goodies. Now I'm not going to open that bag because I'll leave that to you just in case you didn't open your box just yet. So if you want to have a look now with me, and we're going to open a patchwork parcel. So we'll open it up. Woo, isn't that so gorgeous? So what we have in here is, this is our jelly roll strips. So this quilt is designed to be made with 2.5 inch wide strips. Now, if you don't know what a jelly roll is, a jelly roll is a term actually given by the company Moda, but there's loads of other names for them like jolly strips and things like that. But basically it's a 2.5 inch wide strip, and you can buy them in packs like this, or you could cut them from fabric. We have them all cut ready to go for you here, but you might have extra ones left over, and this is a great way to use up after you've made this one to make a few more. So this is a jelly roll. There's 42 in one of these, so it's enough to make a lap quilt, but we didn't need obviously that much for a bag. So we have our jelly roll strips. We have our beautiful lining fabric, that's organic cotton poplin. Our batting, then some interfacing, coordinating thread, a little lanyard hook for your keys, and that'll be done at the end, and then our webbing. So they're all the bits we need. So for the moment, I'm going to leave the batting to one side. I'm going to use just a regular thread rather than this one for my piecing, as in sewing the actual piece together, and keep this for my top stitching and as in quilting. So we don't need our webbing just yet, or our lining, or these ones. So I'm going to leave these to one side, and then I'm going to just work on this first. So you'll see here on our strips, these are the width of fabric. Beautiful colours, all organic cotton, 100% cotton, and it's organic fabric. Oh, aren't they just gorgeous? It's like an autumnal rainbow, absolutely lovely. So if you take a look at the pattern, this is what our bag is going to look like when it's finished. So for actually making it, the first part, we're going to piece our patchwork. So we can skip ahead. This just tells you about the different quantities. They're all in your kit. You don't have to worry about that. Home printing guide. These are all the different parts of our pattern. The pattern does come in the parcel in A0, and I've cut it out. So they're all our pieces. Won't need that just yet. Glossary of terms so that you know what we're talking about, but I'll explain as I go along. This is the page that you need first of all. I have it in colour here so that you can make reference easily with the ones that we have here. So we're going to cut these up. Now I'm going to be working in inches. There is a translation to centimetres here, but I'm going to be working in inches. So I'm just going to leave this to one side. The tools you're going to need are a ruler. Now I'm using a long ruler, but because your jelly roll strips are actually already cut, you don't necessarily need this one. This is great for cutting a jelly roll. But if you have a smaller ruler, which I may just use this little one, something like this, because you're only just cutting the lengths. The longest length is 16 inches. You can also use your board as well. I'll show you those two methods for cutting them. So if you don't have one of these rulers, I'll show you how to cut it just using something like this. So I'm going to show you here how to cut with either a long ruler or your short ruler and cutting mat. Now if you don't have a cutting mat, you can also lay a tape measure beside you. I'll show you those methods. So first of all, I'm going to show you with the long ruler, and we're going to cut the pale pink pieces. That's hard to say, pale pink pieces. So the pale pink ones, we need 2 11-inch pieces and then 2 10-inch pieces. This is on the fold. Generally, I always cut on the fold unless it's longer than the fold of fabric, which is 22 inches longer. So if it's longer than 22, I will just cut it on the single. So on our rulers here, you can see we've got a grid on a patchwork ruler. So you need to use this edge here, this one line, and you place it along the edge. Line that up there, and we're going to cut off our selvage first. So that's the first thing you do, cut off that selvage, because you don't use that. It's slightly thicker fabric. Always close your rotary blade afterwards because they're very sharp. Now turning that around. So if I was using my cutting board, I'm going to carefully lay that out and count. So we've got 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I will put my ruler here and line it up. Now if you don't have one of these boards, get your tape measure or a ruler and then just tape it down and then use that to help you. Because these are quite long, my ruler wouldn't fit. You need a longer ruler. So I'll count that again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Lining up this line here. So we've got a square cut. So that's 11. So I cut from the selvage edge going this way. Always do that because then you might make use of this part that's on the fold. And then the next one is 10. Now I'm going to show you with the other ruler how to do that 10-inch strip. So on our longer ruler, we're literally going to take it and line up 10 here. So we've got a line going that way and then line up here along the edge or along one of those lines. So we know that's nice and square, and then cut that. So we've got 2 10-inch pieces and 2 11-inch pieces. So I would continue along with your pattern pieces and be methodical, cut them all, tick them off. You can see I've done that here, ticking them all off as I go along, and then we can start the next step of assembling the actual patchwork of the quilt. So once you've cut out all your jelly roll strips to the sizes here, you can lay them out in the positions that you need them. So I'm just going to show you that now and just point out a few things you need to just keep an eye out for. So once you've cut out all your jelly roll strips to the sizes here, you can lay them out in the positions that you need them. So I'm just going to show you that now and just point out a few things you need to just keep an eye out for. So here are jelly roll strips, and if you look at page 12 of the pattern, it will give you a diagram of the layout. So we've got, now I'm doing this in twos because we have to make 2 of these panels. So this is E2. Now E2 and E1 are slightly different, so just be careful there, and the same with these strips here. C4 and C2 are slightly different, so in size wise. Oh, dropped one. So I'm just going to line them up, and you can see we have alternating joined piece with a straight piece, joined piece with a straight piece. Now hopefully you can see all of that. So what I'm going to do when I'm assembling all these together is to join these pieces first and then join these together as I go. And there's 2 lots of these. So we need to make 2 panels, one for the front and one for the back outer of the bag. So I'm just going to work my way through this now. I want to take a minute here to talk about seam allowances. Now, many of you will be patchworkers and you know that it's a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. That's a scant 1/4 of an inch. Now I'll explain that in a minute. For patchwork. That's as in for actual piecing. So I've just sewn these here. But dressmaking can be from 1 inch, or sorry, well, for couture it'd be 1 inch, 1/2 an inch to 5/8 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch, or it could be in centimetres. And a 1/4 of an inch seems like a tiny seam allowance. But you have to remember, when these are sewn together, they're also then pressed so that seam is enclosed, and then it's quilted. So there's no pressure really on that seam. So a 1/4 of an inch is enough. It may have been that traditionally they use a 1/4 of an inch seam because it was times when they were using fabric was, scraps of fabric, and fabric was scarce. So 1/4 of an inch is the standard for patchwork piecing. Now, a scant 1/4 of an inch is what we use because we have to take into consideration it folding over. Now, I'm going to explain that. So I've done a 1/4 of an inch and a scant 1/4 of an inch. Now let me remember which one's which. So if I use my little handy gauge, seam gauge, so this is 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now that it's fine to do it that way, and 1/4 of an inch seam allowance is absolutely perfectly fine. But then when I fold this over, it's actually going to be then slightly more than a 1/4 of an inch because the fold has to be taken into consideration. Now for something like this where there's only a few pieces patched together, that's not going to make a massive difference. But if you have a piece where there's lots of different elements to it, it will make a difference, because as it gets bigger you might be adding on a small bit, and then it's like, if it's, you know, one small smidge over a 1/4 of an inch, it can add up all the way over, and then it can make your whole quilt warp. So a scant 1/4 of an inch, I'll show you that there, it's slightly less than a 1/4 of an inch. So it's basically the width of the thread less. Now how I do that on my sewing machine is, well, the trick really to do it is to get 2 5-inch squares and sew them together, and then you measure the width, and that should give you, because your seam allowance is a 1/2 an inch, it should give you a 4.5 inch, or sorry, 8.5 inch width, and that will help you figure it out. But the way I do it is, my machine, I can literally move my needle left and right, so I move it over a little bit just by 1 smidge, and that's the width of the thread. Play around with it and don't worry too much for this pattern, but for anybody out there who's not a patchwork person, that's quite tricky to say, and you're just starting off with this bag, 1/4 of an inch is fine. Now there's a leeway in this pattern, so that's totally fine. If you go a little bit too much or a little bit too less, you'll be fine. So do your best to try and get the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. These little gadgets are handy as well, and also you can get seam tape that actually has a measurement of a 1/4 of an inch on it, and that can really help. So there we have all our pieces, our strips, ready to then assemble together. We have finger pressed them rather than actually seam pressing them, and always go pushing the seam towards the dark side. So my seam is here, so you don't get a dark line under there. So there's a seam going that way, a seam going that way, and one going this way. And as you can see, they're all the same length. Now if I pull that down, you'll see they all should match up. What we're going to do is we're going to put them together in pairs. So we're going to attach this one to this one. And when I'm doing this, there's a trick, I'll just move these over, to getting them to fit perfectly. So here's our two pieces and we want to put these together. Now sometimes one might be bigger than the other. So what you want to do is you fold, particularly if you've got a lot of piecing on a strip, fold this in half and again do this little finger press, give it a little crease. And we have a crease line there. Then fold this in half and we have a crease line here. And then what you want to do is lay them on top of each other, so right sides together, so our seam is facing up. And we take a pin and we pop that in the center there. And we bring that first one up. So we match up our seams at the top and bottom. And then what you can do is you can gently ease those in, like there's not much really to ease them in. So we want to do again a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down. If my seam is going this way, I generally would sew going down here, but that's totally a personal preference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way through all of these. Now you could keep your little chart beside you here so that you all know which ones are which, and just be careful here with each of these that you have the right ones attached to each other. So I'm going to start off with these two and then just double check, okay, B1, that's the yellow long one, and then E1 is the largest blush pink with the brown, and then keep going along like that. And if you're methodical with it and keep going along, it will make it nice and easy. We can keep this beside you or on a device or something like that. So I'm just going to work my way through these and show you what to do next. At this point, I'm going to actually press these seams open as I go. So with an iron, I want to set my seam. So I just iron it without folding it open, and then I open it out and I'm going to nudge that seam open. And this will help you later on when you go to quilting. Just nudge that seam open and you can give it a bit of a steam then. Perfect. I would do that for each one as you go. So I would attach the next one and do the same, attach the next one and do the same. So you keep on going along till you have your panels finished. So there is our panel, our patchwork panel, all together. There's always little bits of threads, all pieced, ready now to be quilted. So you would have two of these. So I'll just show you here. You're going to make two of these, and then we're going to go on to the base. So the base is going to be the longer strips of each of these colours, D1, B1 and C1. So I'm going to take those and piece those together. They're very simple, it's just 3, and it's just this one panel. You only have to make one of those. So we have one of these. I'm going to make another one of these, and then I'm going to piece these together. So I'm going to take my So for the base, we just have these 3 colours. It kind of reminds me of Neapolitan ice cream. I don't know if that's what Sarah meant, but it's just gorgeous, these 3 together. So I'm just going to piece these 3 together. You can do the same thing. Now you'd probably You probably did see on that kind of fast forward video, I didn't actually pin each of my strips together, just because I've been sewing a long time and I could do it really quickly, and to the detriment of my hands, I use them as pins and hold everything as I'm putting it through my machine. So that's what I'm going to do here. But if you're new to sewing, do pin everything. Do that technique of folding it in half, getting the center crease, lining up the center creases, and then do the edges. And that just makes all of those strips line up really well. One other tip as well, if you're doing a lot of strip piecing and you're going in the same direction, what can happen is it can all end up going down one side, slightly slanted, and you don't want that to happen. So the good thing to do is to go down one side and up the other one. I'll just explain that a bit further. So what I mean by that, now just place them out in the right order. So I would sew these together by going along here and these together by going this way. And that would just prevent you from getting all of your, because basically your seams will be, your sewing machine will push your seams down this way, and eventually if you were doing a whole quilt, now 3 strips isn't going to matter, but if you were doing a whole quilt it would end up a bit slanty. So we're just going to sew those together, and then I'm going to show you how to quilt, so baste and quilt this the bag. On the panel I just folded all my seams going the one direction. Now that's fine, but at this point we've got a lighter colour here, and I'm a little bit afraid if I put this going under here, you might be able to see it now, probably won't make that much difference. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the pink going towards the yellow, and I suppose I could either put the yellow going in like that or all going the other way. So you want to always press to the dark side. So first of all, we set our seam again and press. Set the seam and press. At this point we're going to need our batting, so I'm going to take the batting out of the box. And we're using double layers of batting for this. So I'm going to lay 2 layers on top of each other. That's just to give the bag extra stiffness. This is 80-20 cotton batting, just for a bit extra stability. I would only use the 100% cotton for children's items and things like that. So I'm going to lay that on top. I would always give a little extra all the way around. This guy goes down here. I'll do one at a time. Might do him in a minute. So I'm going to use the scissors to cut this. For some reason I only have my pinking shears here with me, and the reason for that is if you actually use your rotary cutter on batting, it gets stuck in your mat, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to cut this off here. I don't know why I only have a pinking shears in the studio. My scissors has gone missing. Anyway, I'm sure we've all been there. So the key here is to pin this. Now you want to use safety pins because you don't want to stab yourself. And for quilting, what we use are curved safety pins. I just keep mine in a jam jar. And a curved safety pin, what happens is when you put them in the quilt, they stand up and they don't warp the actual fabric. So I'm going to pin this now. If this was a big quilt, you would have to stretch it and everything, but you don't need to do that for this. There is another option of for this is called basting your quilt, and what you can do is you can actually use spray baste, but I have asthma, and if you have any lung issues, it can be very irritating and possibly damage your lungs. So I'm just going to pin that through, and that's just to stop it from moving. So we're quilting each of our panels and our base separately. So I'll just show you on this. Now, can you see where I'm putting the pins? I'm putting the pins in the center of our jelly rolls. I'm not putting them, because we're going to actually go along the edge here. And you can see in your pattern, this is where we're going to quilt. Not in the ditch, but right beside it. So we're going to call this stitching in the hedge rather than the ditch. I don't think that's an actual term. I think I've just made it up. So if you can't follow the ditch and you end up in the hedge, you're all right. I think some of these are a little bit blunt. You don't need too many. Generally, it's a hand's width apart. Enough so that it doesn't move around too much. So we're going to quilt here with a walking foot. Now, I'm going to show you what a walking foot is and how to attach it onto your machine in case you're new to walking feet. Because you may have one and not know how to use it. So let me get me my walking foot and I'll show you how it works. So this is a walking foot. And the idea of a walking foot is it has a bar here that raises and lowers feed dogs on the top. And it works in conjunction with the feed dogs at the bottom of your machine. And basically what it does is it helps move the fabric through at an even rate. So if you've got a very thick fabric, it will help you move your fabric through evenly and prevent puckers. Now, you're never going to get 100% get rid of puckers, but it will stop them from being really bad. Now, this is very small quilting projects, so generally I wouldn't bother. But if you have a walking foot, it's good practice on a smaller quilt before you begin a larger one. So what you need to do is you need to take off your regular foot, which is here. Now I have, this little gadget that comes with your machine, or a screwdriver. Use that. So this is tricky when you're not left-handed. Unscrew that. You should probably take off the needle first so you don't stab yourself. I'm going to do my best here. And this bar, so this is the part that goes on to the bar coming down that it screws into, and this part here needs to go over. Now if I move this down, you'll see here where the screw is that holds your needle in. So I'm just going to place that over and lift it up. Nope. I think I have to take the screw out of my machine. Try not to lose it. Then pop the screw back in. Now make sure that's as tight as possible. You don't want it wobbling off. And you can see, I'll just take my thread out because I'm not going to use this thread for my quilting. So if I move this needle up and down, you can see the feed dogs working together. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop in my coloured thread, my thread I'm going to quilt with, because at the moment we haven't actually been quilting. Is what we normally think of as quilting is actually the patchwork part. Quilting is where you put 3 layers together and to make a thicker fabric. Now I should be able to auto thread this. Now normally I would use a cotton thread, but it's not necessary when we're making a bag. This is a polyester thread, so it might help it be a little bit stronger. So I'm going to lift this up. So the next thing to do is to start quilting. So you're going to have to change some of the settings on your sewing machine. Now let me move you over here. Can you see that? So on my machine here, the standard stitch length is 2.5, but I need to change that because that's way too short for doing quilting. So I'm going to lengthen that stitch length to 4. Actually 4.5 is about right for this machine. And then, yeah, it is in the center there. Sometimes it's not on this machine. I also want to change my, I also want to change the tension. I'm going to lower the tension just the tiniest little bit. And what that does is it allows a little bit more slack for when you're quilting, because we do have 2 layers of batting here. There's quite a lot we're trying to get through. See, when you're quilting, you should keep your hands at a good distance apart. And we're going to quilt a line here. So we're going to use a point on our quilting foot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this edge piece here. And I think I might actually move my, because I want to get just along the edge here. So remember, we're not stitching in the ditch. We're going to stitch in this little hedge. Well, that's what we're going to call it anyway. So we start off and then we work our way along, because remember, that's going to be trimmed off and you get a nice neat edge. So I'm going to go nice and slowly, because this is called a walking foot, not a running foot. Now, don't worry if it gets caught behind. Sometimes that happens, particularly with this table on my machine. So I'm just letting the walking foot pull the quilted layers through and just guiding it. Now you don't do any back stitch. I'm just going to cut that thread and then do my next layer. Now, isn't that lovely? A bit of fluff on it there, but we can get that off. So what I'm going to do then is, you see that? Isn't that gorgeous? I'm going to continue on, and you can use the chart that's on the pattern on page 13, and it will tell you where to quilt. So you want to continue on and do this on both layers. So I have finished quilting and making my panels. So you should have 2 panels. These are going to be the sides, the outer part of our bag. And then I've also made the base part of our bag. And at this point we have 2 choices here when we're cutting out our panels. We can either use the pattern pieces. So in your Patchwork Parcel you've got pattern pieces, or you can use the measurements on our pattern. I'm going to use the pattern pieces because numbers are quite difficult for me, so there's different options depending on what way your brain works. So I'm going to show you how to cut them out if you're just using the pattern pieces. Otherwise, follow the instructions and literally measure in the pattern. So here's our base for our pattern. So it's got 2 layers of batting, and I've quilted it, and we need to cut this piece out of this. So what I want to do is I want to try center it as much as possible. So I folded this pattern piece in half and I'm placing it on top, and the notches are the halfway point as well. So you could either use pins and pin it on, or if you have pattern weights, I have these very fancy donut ones, you can use those or pin them on. Either is totally fine. And using either a rotary cutter or scissors, Now at this point we need to trim in these notches here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pop some pins in, because you're not going to be able to see those notches. So I'm just going to use a pin here, and sometimes I do that anyway, because if I'm doing an item, making something over the space of time, if I mark the notches with a pen, they'll disappear. But if you clip them in, especially with dressmaking, can actually putting notches in can, if you put them in too far, it can be tricky, and you might actually go into your seam allowance. But I'm just going to put these in, and then that's easier for you to see as well. So those pins are where my notches are. So I'm going to do the same for each of these. Take my Now that we've finished quilting the outer shell of our bag, we're ready to move on to our lining. So you're going to need your lining fabric from your kit and 2 pattern pieces. So that's pattern piece B and pattern piece E. Pattern piece B is the main lining fabric, so we're cutting this on the fold, so that's 2 layers of fabric at the one time. And I'm using a scissors here because I feel I have more control with a scissors rather than a rotary cutter. And as well, these little notches to cut those in, and then cutting the little corner sections, I feel I have a bit more control there with the scissors rather than the rotary cutter. With a rotary cutter, you might have to actually cut into your pattern. So I just feel like I have a little bit more control there, particularly with all these tiny notches that you need to mark. So then we have to move on to pattern piece E, which is the lining pocket. So it's a pocket that's going to be inside the lining of our bag. So I'll put the piece I've just cut to one side and take the last piece of fabric there, place my pattern piece on top, pin all the way around, and cut out as usual. So once you've cut out your lining pieces, so you have 2 of your lining pieces for the main parts of the lining, because we cut these on the double, then you have 2 of your pocket pieces. So the pocket pieces are the ones we need to do something to first, and I'm going to show you how to do that now. So you take these pocket pieces and you lay them right sides together. Now it's a little bit tricky on camera, but you'll be able to see that no problem yourself. So right sides together. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew along here with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once we have those sewn, we will have this sort of a tube shape. So you want to turn that right side out, and then we're going to press this along the top edge and the bottom edge. The next step here is to top stitch along this edge, and then we're going to attach it to our lining of our bag. So we're going to top stitch that now. Once that is top stitched, we can attach it to the lining of our bag. So I'm going to take one of my lining pieces like this. And we have little notches at the side. Now that's, if you forget to put them in, that's 1 inch up from the side where this part is cut out. So I'm going to line up the bottom here with here. Pin that on. So I'm lining that up there. Just going to pop a pin in here just to keep it in place. So our next part then is to actually sew this pocket down. And we're sewing down here, and as you're sewing down, I would do a back stitch just here where the pocket attaches, and do a back stitch here, and then come back up and pivot, sew all the way along here, back stitch here, and that'll just give it a little bit of extra strength, and the same up here, and leave this open. And then what you want to do is you want to sew a line halfway, or maybe if you wanted a large pocket and a smaller pocket for a drinks bottle, that's totally up to you. You can decide which one you want to do. And as they say on TV, here's one I did earlier. So you can see now, because it's a patterned fabric, it's tricky to see. So I've got 2 pockets, and what I did was I sewed a line down here, and I did a little triangle at the top to reinforce that. Can you see that? Tiny little triangle there at the top. It may be a little bit easier to actually see those stitch line directions on the tutorial, the instructions here, the written tutorial. And you can see those lines there. Next, we're going to work on our lanyard. So the lanyard is the little length of fabric with a hook on it, so you can put your keys on and things like that. So you have one of these little hooks. You've also got a pattern piece, a pattern piece F, and we've cut that out of the coral fabric, but you can decide what fabric you're going to do. And the written instructions are on page 21. So I'm just going to talk you through that, and then we'll go on to the next step. So we take our pattern piece, and we're going to be doing a little bit of folding, but I'm going to press these so they stay in place. So I'm going to press it in half. It's a little bit like making bias binding. And then we're going to bring each of those sides in to that line. So we've got a crease down the center there. So I'm going to bring those in to the center. And then we fold that in half again. And then I'm going to sew that down. Now, so I'm going to sew that down there with a top stitch all the way along the edge. So I'm just going to edge stitch this. So I've done that top stitching there. And I've tried to get it as close to the edge as possible. Now, my machine, what I did was, because I didn't have my edge foot with me, I used my zip foot, just because it's not as wide. So this is the regular foot on my machine, and if I move my needle over here, I can't see right at the edge here. It's because it's solid. So if you have a clear foot, that would be really useful. Otherwise, everybody generally has a zip foot, and that's what I would use for this. Or if you have an edge foot, that is really, really useful, but I use my zip foot. So I got nice and close to the edge there. So I'm going to slot this through. Need to trim off any of those little bits. I'll trim that off so it's nice and straight. And what you want to do now is just fold this under, okay, flip it over, and we're going to be sewing this side here. But I'm going to do it from the front. So that's all tucked under. Can you see that there? So it's tucked under. And be careful because these edges, they like to wobble and shift. So it might be no harm giving this a press so it stays in place, or use one of those little tiny clips. A little clip. Add that clip there, and that will help me keep that in place. So I'm going to do an X design here. Now it's not really just for it's not for the look purposes, it's more to secure this lanyard because your keys might be heavy and you don't want them falling off. So we're going to do a line going straight across here, then we're going to go diagonally, then we're going to go this way, then we're going to go diagonally again. So we have a cross. Now you could just do a box and then a cross, that's totally up to you, or you could just do a couple of lines. Once it's completely secure, it will do the job. And that's our lanyard done. I just need to clip off any loose threads. If your machine found this tricky going through this bulk, don't worry about doing that X mark. You might need to just give it a nudge through the machine. And there's our little, and that's really strong. Now, when you're doing that, do be careful that you leave enough space here for your machine foot to turn around. If you go too close to your little hook at the top, it's just not going to be able to turn. So we need to attach now our lanyard to our bag. So we're going to have it so that it's easy to grab from the top of our tote bag, and it needs to be about 3 inches in. So 1, 2, 3. So we're just going to attach it here. Mine seems to be quite long. That's okay. So I'm going to attach that there at the top. I'm going to grab my little clip again, just to keep it on because a pin will not go through there. And I'm going to sew that on. I'm going to go back and forth a couple of times just to make sure it's completely secure. So that's my lanyard stitched in, ready for the rest to be assembled. I'm going to take the other lining, main lining, and I'm going to place them on top of each other. So this is right sides together. And I need to stitch now down these sides here. And then along the bottom, we are not going to stitch completely along the bottom. We're going to come in about 3 inches. So 3 inches is about there on each one. There should be notches on this. You could go to those notches as well. And then we're leaving a gap, and that's so that we can turn it inside out. So we're going to stitch along the sides and then about 3 inches in here. So I've stitched that together using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And you can see by doing that, all the seams from my seam allowance from when I attach my pocket are enclosed then. So this outside line is the line I used, the line of stitching for assembling the lining. At this point, what you want to do is you want to press these open, these seams. Because this is quilting cotton, I'm just going to finger press these, and it will stay open, and that just makes it easier later on for assembling everything together. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to box our corners. So these corners that are clipped out, we want to make them so that the internal shape is boxy. So that's calling boxing our corners. So what I do is I pinch just at that corner here where this cutout is on one side, and do the same on the other side. Imagine you're opening a packet of crisps and pull them together. Now I'll do that again. You can always press rewind on this. So we take one side and the other side and place them together. And we want to make sure, the seam allowances, that they nest. So we've done this a lot in patchwork. So one goes to the right and one goes to the left, and we nest those together and pop a little pin in. So I'm popping some pins in here. And we're going to use the 1 inch seam allowance again and go across this, and the same with the other corner. Let's find my other corner. Take each side and it's like you're opening a packet of crisps. Pull it apart, and then you want to nest those seams together. And that way you know they're completely lined up. So that's the lining of our bag done. I'm going to turn it the other way around now. You won't actually be looking at it the other way around, but just to give you an idea of how those box corners work. So after sewing a box corner, can you see the way it's a little squared corner? So when that's sitting in your bag, it'll be nice and roomy and it won't take up any space. So I'm just going to turn that the other way around, put my lanyard inside, and we're going to move on to the next step. Now we're going to add the webbing to our bag, the outer part of our bag. So you're going to need your 2 outers and then your 2 pieces of webbing. So they're 55 inches long, the webbing bags. Now you could adapt this if you prefer that the handle it needs to be shorter or longer. And to do that, I would actually place it out, pin it on, put the bag on your shoulder, see if that's the right length for you. I know I'm quite short, so I don't like a bag to be down too long. Or if you're taller, you might like them longer. So we're going with 55 inches for the standard amount here, and we just need to do one at a time. So we're going to lay the straps on the inside of the mustard yellow where our pins are. That's where my notches are, but I use pins so that I could see them easier. And I'm going to get my clips again. And I'm going to clip that on and bring it along here, and I'm going to pop another clip here. Now make sure this is not twisted. You don't want to have a twist in this strap. So we're just going to lie it like that. So we've got one there and one there down the bottom. And then what we need to do is we need to sew this on. So we're going to sew either side here, and we're stopping 2 inches before the top. Now you can measure that out. I'll just use my patchwork ruler. I'm going to use a friction pen. You could use a water soluble pen, something like that. 2 inches below the top. So I'm stopping here. That will come out with heat. And then I'm going to also put at the top here that same box, the cross box that we did before. So I'm going to go across and back, and that will give it strength. So we need to sew along here, and then we're going to do a cross, and then along here, both sides, and then do a cross as well. And you need to do that on both of them. And that's our bag straps sewn in. I'm just going to cut off those tiny threads. And you can see I did that cross shape there. It is useful, because this is so thick, to lengthen your stitch length, and that will just help you get through all of those layers without having any issues with tension or anything like that. So we should have, oh, is it starting to feel like a bag? So we have 2 outside pieces now. Isn't that lovely? So I can imagine what it's going to be like as a bag. Perfect. Actually, I do think, I'm just putting it on me now, and I think that size is a good length for me. I'm 5'2", just so you know. So I think that's a good length. Let me do the little test. Does it hit the ground? No, when I'm holding it. Good plan. Okay, so you take these, and the next part is to add the base. We put in pins instead of notches for those center points there, top and bottom. And the same we did for our base. So all we have to do now is pop that on top there, match up those two pins and pin that in place. Now this is really chunky, so if you are finding it difficult to put those pins in, clips are the way to, yeah, this is just too chunky for me to do. So I'm just going to grab a clip and grab one of those clips, and I'm going to put that in all the way along there. So you want to lengthen your stitch length when you go to sew this. So we're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're going to sew along here with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to lengthen the stitch length to about 3.5. If your machine is really struggling, try 4, and just take your time with this. We're going to stitch this along here. Once we have that done, we need to press it open. So we're going to press it so the seam allowance is towards the center, so as in towards us and the bag bottom. Give that a press. At this point, if you have plastic pins, be really careful, because you don't want to melt them into your bag at this stage. And we're going to top stitch here. Now you're after adding on more layers again, and this is to make sure it keeps it nice and neat and underneath. So you want to then increase your stitch length, because that's quite a thick amount of fabric we're getting through. So we're going to top stitch along here. So then that's basically keeping your seam allowances together. So what I've done then is I've added on the other side. I've sewn that on in the same way, and I'm just going to top stitch. So I want to first of all press the seam allowance towards the base. So press my seam allowance towards the base, give it a good press, and then I'm going to top stitch along here. So our bag should look like this at this point. We want to close it up and line up those top edges here, and we're going to sew along each of these side edges. Using that 1/2 inch seam allowance again, we're just going to sew along each of these sides. So our bag is starting to take shape, and what we want to do is box those corners like we did before. So we'll take the corners, this will be a little bit easier because they're a bit stiffer, and you're just lining up that notch, but we put in a pin so that you can see it easily, and I'm lining those up, and because it's quite thick, I'm going to use my little clips, my quilting clips again. Turn it around this way. So we're lining up that notch with the seam allowance there. And I'm popping in a couple of clips just to keep it in place. And we sew this with the, oh no, that's after moving. There. Now, we sew that with our 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way along. Make sure that you get all the way to the seams on the other side. So you want to make sure that you catch in all that seam all the way across there. So both sides we're going to sew. So once we have that done, you can see it really takes bag form. So we're going to set this to one side, and we're going to just finish off our lining, and then we're going to assemble the whole bag together. I'm going to pop this over here. So we'll take our lining that we had made before, and then we're going to take, we've got our facing, so this is the top facing, and we have 2 strips of the quilting cotton and 2 strips of our interfacing, and I need to interface that fabric before I can begin. So we need to put the sticky side down, so that's the one with the texture, that's going to be facing down. And what I do is I just press it onto it. I don't iron back and forth because it's going to move then, just so that it holds. And at this stage you can give it a little steam. And you can, because it's glued, I can move the iron along. Let me just make sure that's adhered nicely. So we're going to take those 2 pieces of our facing for our bag, and we're going to place them right sides together and sew either side with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So this is going to be the inside of our, when we look into our bag, this will all be around the top, and that interfacing just gives it a bit of stability for your bag, so it'll open nicely. So we're going to take it and we're going to place it so that the bag lining right side and the facing right side are together, so that you're putting it inside it. Get in. Okay, I'm going to pin all the way around. So we're right sides together. I'm going to nest my seams. On the pattern it does say to open your seams out, but nesting your seams will actually give you a stronger finish because that seam isn't exposed. So nest that seam together so they're all lined up. So I'm going to do one side and the other side. And then pin. I'm just going to put a couple of pins in just to hold it in place. And I'm going to sew all the way around there with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then we can lift that up and you'll see we have lovely colour on the inside there. So our next step is to actually insert the lining into our bag, and then we have some finishing touches and our bag will be finished completely. So we take our main bag lining and then we have to put this inside. But well, first of all, this can be a very confusing step if you've never made bags before. You need to turn your bag lining the other way around when you're placing it in. So you're going to have right sides facing each other when you place them inside. So you take your bag outer and then you pop your bag lining inside, and then what we want to do is we want to match up all those edges at the points where there's seams, and then I'll do the other seam first before I start doing other areas. So I'm going to put a clip on either side. So I'll just bring that together so it's taut and pin that. I'm going to use a clip. Now at this point, pop your handles down. You don't want to sew. I nearly sewed over my handles. Pop your handles down. We don't want them to be sewn over. They're not wanting to stay. There we go, that's a bit better. So what we're going to do is a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around here. Now comes the fun part. So what we have to do is we take the lining and then we're going to pull the bag through that lining. Take your time with it. You don't want to rip anything at this stage, but it's a fun thing to do, called birthing your bag. It's always like a ta-da moment, even though there's a couple of little steps afterwards, just to finish it off. Push those corners out. Oh, isn't that gorgeous? Now, our bag is basically finished, but we have to do a couple of other things. Oh, isn't it just lovely? But there's a couple of things we need to do just to finish it off. So you take your lining and we're going to close up by top stitching that opening. And then the last and final thing is to turn that facing. So giving this a press so that it's facing down. So you just turn that down, or you could do it by hand, and we're going to top stitch all the way around. And once I've done that, I'm going to show you my finished bag. So I've top stitched and then I've closed up my bag in the center, and that's our finished tote bag. Isn't it brilliant? I hope you enjoyed making this Patchwork Parcel tote bag by Incomplete Stitches, and I shall see you all for the next one. Bye bye.